And even too much exposure can be traumatized. I talked to a father who said he realized that his son was acting out these illicit behaviors because he was carrying porn in his pocket. And what he meant by that is that he was 10 years old with an iPhone and having access to information. See, we didn't have that type of access back then, but also the downside of it is that there were a lot of quiet things happening inside of homes that no one talked about. And I think parents can start with, one, not denying the behaviors that you see. Don't act like they don't exist. Pull your children in and attempt to have a conversation. That's the first thing that you can do.
Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Dwelling Place Ministry with Evangelist Doris J. Roberson, where women and men meet, wisdom and resources are shared. We have an exciting program for you today with Dr. Cecelia Martin. This is a book talk on Incarcerated, Escaping the Prison of Your Mind. You do not want to miss out. Make sure you like, comment, and share with a friend that you know needs to hear this. Thank you for all the support. Enjoy.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much, Evangelist, for having me tonight. I am so excited to have this conversation about escaping the prison of your mind. First and foremost, I wasn't born on the East Coast, although I lived there for a while. So people actually, think that I was. But I was born in the great state of Texas and born and raised there. Now, at a point in my life when I was younger, when we were young, my mom did move to the East Coast with myself and my brother while we were still very young, and then moved back to Texas. And then also after I left high school, I landed on the East Coast for a while, and now I'm back in Houston. So I say that I have dual stateship. I actually lived in both places for the equal amount of time. But so what people need to know about me is, first, I'm an educator at heart. And, when I was first in college, my first job was at a level 4 special education school. And at that time, what that meant was that these children were either in foster care or had extreme behaviors or very poor performance, usually a combination of both. And at that school, my goodness, it was really life-changing. I was working with younger people at the time, and I was kicked and stabbed with pencils, punched in the stomach, all types of things. But what I realized is that these children were traumatized, and that's why they were there. So fast forward a few years, I'm out of college, and I actually started teaching high school as a special education high school teacher. Similar experiences where, there were threats and things of that nature. Some of my students were gang members. One young man had, seen his sister murdered before his eyes. Someone else, was homeless and was in the sometimes in class with roaches crawling through his physical person on his clothes. And those children were labeled as emotionally disturbed, which meant that at that time in the academic setting that there was something that was affecting their academics, but they couldn't exactly say exactly what the specific trauma was. And my point is that I saw myself in those kids because I was constantly suspended from high school. I was drinking, I was smoking, I had promiscuous behavior. I was angry. I was always suspended for fighting, believe it or not. 5'2" at the time. I'm still 5'2", but at the time, 97 pounds, always thinking that I had something to prove or that someone was after me. And I had all of these horrible behaviors. So that was my past, and it only informed my future. And so as an educator, I continued on and left the public school system and started working for Johns Hopkins University, the Maryland State Department of Education. I went on to do individual consulting. Of course, I worked at other places in school districts, both large and small. But then I began to work as an independent consultant on helping schools with turnaround issues or schools that were in need of improvement. So coaching teachers and principals through that process and doing some training. And I worked on Indian reservations. I worked in the Appalachian Mountains. I worked in the city of Chicago. So I've had the pleasure of seeing multiple types of students from all walks of life, young people who were experiencing trauma, and these teachers who needed and principals who needed to learn the emotional stamina to deal with them. But at the heart of it, I'm an educator. And as I continued on in college, I received my doctorate in organizational leadership because I found that school districts as an organization, you know, the principles that I was learning were applicable both far and wide and broad across any scope of organization. And I learned, because of my background in education, to intersect educational best practices with leadership principles. And so it was a wonderful combination and marriage. And from that, you know, academic marriage. And after that, my work in leadership really took off. And that's what took me internationally, talking about toxic leadership and leadership in general, servant leadership, transformational leadership, but primarily how we can recognize these toxic behaviors and mitigate them over time.
Wow, that's a impressive journey, educational pursuit, and my hat's off to you, especially as I heard you say that you identified with some of those traumas that those young people were going through. You understood, you had experienced that trauma yourself as coming up. So with that, it's a good segue into asking you, how did the title Incarcerated, Escaping the Prison of Your Mind, how did that come about?
Yeah, it was initially before I wrote this book, I had always intended to write a book called The Sparrow, to sort of talk about my 20s, you know, it's discovering this journey of healing. But as I started writing The Sparrow, I realized that I needed to go back to the genesis of it all. Okay. And my father, first of all, my parents were teen parents. My mom, they were pregnant with my brother in high school. And then I came along 13 months later. And so they were kids raising kids. And my father, although he came from a family that was spiritual in nature, you know, my grandfather on my father's side was a pastor for 50 years. But my father was wayward. And he ultimately received a 36-year sentence in prison. And that was the plea bargain. He could have gotten 99.
My God.
And with that, so prior to my father going to prison, my mom and dad had already separated. And as a result of his absenteeism, so many traumatic things happened to me, not only outside of his watch, but even on his watch when he was supposed to be with me, taking care of me. And those traumas just, you know, it really just, it did a mind game on me. I realized even as an adult. And, you know, one day I was going through his letters that he had written me from prison. And I realized, man, you know, he seemed to have found freedom on the inside. And I was outside, but incarcerated emotionally.
Oh, wow.
I was so traumatized by things that happened to me in my past that I was emotionally locked away. I was emotionally disturbed by all definitions. I was, you know, developed this sort of protective personality, right? And it was, and so that is how I came about with the title, Escaping the Prison of Your Mind, because until I realized that my past does not define me. It only informs my future. It
Yes.
only informs where I came from and who I am. But I really realized that the transformation that took place in me really had to take place in my mind first.
Yes. So as we think about your book, now is your book aligned with more a self-help, uh, not more of your journey as a young person? Can you tell us more in terms of what would a reader be receiving?
Mm-hmm. Well, first and foremost, it is not a self help book.
Okay. All right.
I did not want to be Dr. Martin writing a self help book. And really, because I find that when you hear other people's stories, you find hope. When
Okay.
you see that someone else has gone through exactly what you've gone through or worse, you find hope. And so the book is intentionally written in novel form.
Okay.
Most people don't know that I do have a degree in literature. And so I love to write. And I intentionally wrote it in a form of a novel to tell a story. And I'm telling you, I've gotten so many wonderful feedbacks. Most people, they pick it up and they read it and they say they can't put it down. They read it in 2 or 3 days. I've had people to call me sobbing in tears to say, there's some things that I haven't addressed, I haven't talked about, and you've given me the courage to do that. I've
Yes.
had people to say, both young and old, that, oh my God, I wish I had known this or known that when I was younger, because they wasted so many years being incarcerated to their past and not living their future. People see me who I am now, but it was hard. It was a
Yes.
long, hard road to break free from the identification that my circumstances created, that these events, these traumatic events that happened to me created, but they don't define who you are. They
Yes.
don't. Yeah.
What was the realization that led to that, though? Because obviously it was a process.
Yeah.
So walk us through or help us to know where did it first begin to shape the new you, and
Mm-hmm.
when you begin to escape from being in prison.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will first say that it was indeed a process and a journey. I feel like there were people over time that was in a relay race with me, like divinely positioned in my life. So one person took the baton and got me through a phase in life. Someone else stepped in as a mentor or a guide, divinely placed in my life to get me to the next level. But I will tell you that it is such an intense journey to stay free emotionally. Like, you have to be extremely intentional about that. And for me, I began to somewhat break free before I joined the military, just somewhat. And then, even in that experience, there were some things that dropped me back into the darkness. Then
Mhm.
I went. Then I went off to college, and again, divine intervention through people um, who God placed in my life to get me to the next phase. When I was feeling suicidal, when I was exhibiting toxic behaviors, when and what I've learned, though, is that if I had been more aware that I was emotionally incarcerated, really in prison, that was half the battle, because I thought to some degree I was just normal. I
Mhm.
thought to some degree that, think about when children are violated sexually or emotionally, but particularly with sexual violations or traumatized, you don't realize that that behavior isn't normal.
Okay.
until a certain age. You know,
Okay.
I remember very distinctly being at a slumber party when I was younger, and the girls and I were talking, and I mentioned something, sexual that had happened to me. I thought
Ah,
I thought somebody did that to everybody. And they looked at me very bizarre. I was like, no, sorry, no, we
yeah.
haven't experienced that. I'm like, oh, what? That's not normal. So that too was the beginning of enlightenment to say this. How as a child you can feel things are wrong, but you can't articulate
Mm-hmm.
that it is wrong. You just feel it. And then especially if you're betrayed by someone that you trust, an adult figure in your life that is supposed to be protective of you, you don't really know that it's not normal. And that's the sad part. And so as I think I was in my mid 20s when I realized, I am seriously jacked up. I have an alternate personality that's protecting me. That's not normal. I I feel a certain way when certain men are around me. That's not normal.
Okay.
Or I don't know how to and I didn't know how to turn those things off. And especially in high school, I was acting out a lot. And that's what I want parents and other people to know, that sometimes these children, they're young or they're teenagers, the acts that you see are really a cry for help. Really a cry
Yes.
for help. Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit more. Help our parents and those that are in this audience to even know that your book is written so that even a younger person, I understand. And I was on Amazon today, and it is really intriguing. I
Mm-hmm.
can vouch for those that are out there in the audience. It's a easy, it pulls you in. so
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
well written,
Thank
well
you.
written. But talk about parents and guardians, and did your mother recognize that there was something wrong, or was there other people in your life that were there to say this is not normal? Can you speak to that, just because you
Sure.
brought it up, and I don't want to leave parents hanging. How
Sure.
and what should they do now that you were, in your profession? How address that?
Well, I think, first, when I was growing up, we didn't really talk about it. We didn't, there was just stuff you didn't talk about. And I don't know that my mom realized that I think, I don't know that she realized that, because she was also a kid. My mom
Mm,
grew up with us. My father was incarcerated for most of my life. My mom was working 2 and 3 jobs, keeping food on the table. And the irony of it is that my brother began to step in a role that he was never designed for, which was trying to be man of the house. He's only 13 months older than me. And so I think we see these sort of types of dysfunction, and we too see it as normal. My mom, I'm seeing some generational layers here. Some things that I experienced, she experienced, or, she didn't have her father, I didn't have my father. So we began to normalize sort of these patterns. But when you see a child acting out, I have seen kids recently as young as 7 or 8 literally were attempting to act out a sexual act on another kid. His father had raped him repeatedly.
mm,
So what do you expect? Now, you don't know that if you don't have access to their, information. You may not know that, but I'm trying to tell parents and adults, when you see kids acting out, whether they're young or whether they're teenagers, a lot of kids are cutting, a lot of kids are trying drugs. It's all types of things, promiscuity. Kids are exposed to so much. You really need to have a conversation with them, because it's probably that they are expressing some trauma that they've experienced. And even too much exposure can be traumatized. I talked to a father who said he realized that his son was acting out these illicit behaviors because he was carrying porn in his pocket. And what he meant by that is that he was 10 years old with an iPhone and having access to information. See, we didn't have that type of access back then, but also the downside of it is that there were a lot of quiet things happening inside of homes that no one talked about. And I think parents can start with, one, not denying the behaviors that you see. Don't act like they don't exist. Pull your children in and attempt to have a conversation. That's the first thing that you can do.
So was it difficult? Talk about writing and putting your personal story. What was the most difficult portion? Was there times when it became so emotional for you? Or how were you able to separate? How was that process in writing your story? This is based on a true story.
Mm-hmm. It was extremely difficult at times. It was difficult, one, to read through my father's old letters because so many memories flooded back to my mind and to my heart. It was also very difficult to rewrite some incidents that happened to me because I had to go back there to that place. I had to be that little girl all over again. I had to be that teenager all over again. I had to be the young adult over again. So it was very difficult at times because, and I started having anxiety attacks. I found myself leaning back into a dark place of depression, fantasizing about suicidal thoughts as I did when I was younger. I had to pray a lot. I had people that I would call on to say, I need you to pray for me. I need you to cover me because, after writing and all of that, I need to be able to pull out of it. And it makes me understand too, how actors can fall into a role because they're becoming that person. And oftentimes, I don't know if you follow some of the actors, but they say they often have to go in therapy afterwards, or they have to go into counseling to come out of that place that you've had to put yourself into in order to, for me, put the words on page and the emotions on page.
Wow. What was the motivation that made you push through? To push through. You wanted to have this book published.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted to write the book, even though you enjoy writing. But what made you decide that I need to push through even though this is difficult? Why did you what was the motivation behind pushing through?
Because I needed someone else to know that there is hope. I have run across so many people, young and old, who are still harboring hurt, who are still harboring pain, who are still mad at God. I'm talking about men and women, boys and girls.
Yes.
Because men are even less likely to talk about what they have experienced. I know men who were raped and molested at a very young age. And that developed their character. And then they become the predator all over again. But they're only acting out what they know or what they've experienced as well. So for me, because I've come across too many young people and adults alike who are still hurting. And I know, my gosh, I went through a phase where I was mad at God. I was so angry. I was angry for being born. I was angry for the things that he allowed to happen to me. I was distraught. God was never my first plan. He wasn't my first choice. He was my contingency plan.
All right.
Because I had developed such a hard heart and such a black mind that I thought I have to protect myself. I can't be protected, not even by God. And so for me to come to the other side of that with some understanding that everything that I experienced was for a purpose, I
Yeah.
think that's the biggest thing. People think that they experience trauma, they experience things that blow up their life like a grenade, and they don't see the purpose in it. But I'm here to let you know that there is real purpose in it. And
Yeah.
you cannot experience light if you don't know how to contrast it against the darkness. And
That's
it's
good.
never there to kill you. It's there to inform you of now what is your purpose moving forward? What is your role in life? Now who are you going to help? How are you going to pay it forward? You don't know what life is until you've been close to death or been around death. You have to have something to contrast and appreciate the place that you get to, and you get there ultimately. And it doesn't have to be a long process if you understand that what you have experienced was for a purpose. And it sucks, especially, for people who, have lost a child early. I think about things like that where people have lost this lady. It was in the news a few months ago. My God, every time I think about it, I kind of tear up. She lost her 5-month-old and her toddler to her dogs. Her dogs mauled them to death. And the dogs she had had for a long time, those were her only 2 kids. And she was in the hospital holding on to a lifeline in ICU. And her husband, so they are all just, and I thought, my God, when she wakes up from this, I hope that someone is there to speak life to her. I hope someone is there to walk her through her journey. And that's what this book is about. I have had the pleasure or the blessing of picking up books in my life that walked me through the next phase, because I was like, oh, I'm not alone. Yeah, somebody else has been in this dark place. Somebody else has been hopeless. Somebody else has wanted to die. Someone else was mad at God. Someone else has now overcome that. And that's what helped me to push through. There are too many kids out here. There are too many young adults out here. There are too many old people out here who are going to die, with venom in their heart, feeling, despondent, feeling hopeless. But it really was for a purpose. And you can get to the other side. I'm living proof of that.
Absolutely, because you're the CEO of TEEM.
Mm-hmm.
And TEEM stands for teach or train, equip,
Mm-hmm.
empower, and mobilize. Tell us, that was a great segue.
Yeah.
You had the experience of being a at-risk child growing up, growing up in dysfunction. Mm-hmm. So tell us about how your organization came about, and give us more information about what you do with your organization.
Sure. So TEEM, as you stated, stands for Train, Equip, Empower, Mobilize. And that was birthed out of a very spiritual experience. I was in church one day, and Ralph Dennis, and I call him Ralph Dennis, even though he's a bishop or archbishop now. But at the time, he was Ralph Dennis, and he was preaching a sermon called Team Ministry. And it was train, equip, empower, mobilize. And the gist of that was that you don't have to have a calling, you don't have to feel like you have a special calling or a title or be somebody in the eyes of others to affect your sphere of influence. Everybody is here to affect someone else's life.
That's good.
And it was to empower you as a person in the pew to train, equip, empower, and mobilize yourself into your purpose. And I was so moved by that, because for the first time, one of the first times I felt like I am somebody. And I was a nobody in the grand scheme of things. I wasn't doctor. I wasn't even thinking about being a doctor. I was just a little teacher, but I know I wanted to help these kids. I knew that. And I said, you know what? I want that to be the name of my business. So I went to him after the service, and I asked him, and I talked about it to him several times, but could I take that as the name of my business? And he said, absolutely, and that's how TEEM came about, because by that time I had been through the military, and I was training teachers at my school. I always had leadership roles where I was mentoring or coaching or what have you. And so I started out with TEEM as sort of this training and development for teachers who worked with at-risk youth. That was the focus of it. And then there was another sort of pathway with TEEM. I had sort of these tracks. When I think about it now, it's sort of cute and funny when I think about my old little brochures. But there was a sort of an independent track for individual teaming, thinking about your own personal pathway and your career path and things like that. And then over time, so my first really official training was at a parochial school for teachers who were working with at-risk kids in the inner city. And they were educators, but they hadn't really had any enough formal training and development, and definitely didn't know necessarily how to work with that population. What I discovered too is a lot of times many of the times the teachers who work with that population don't necessarily live there in that area, and they may not have experienced what those kids have experienced. I'm talking gang leaders and people who've been shot, and I had a rapist in my class. He was a criminal, adjudicated youth. So I started off with that. And over time, I realized that the framework was so succinct that it really was applicable across any industry, the framework itself. And so I began to use that to work with school districts, like I said before, for underperforming schools, those who were in need of improvement, those who are working with at-risk kids. And then I started working with faith-based institutions to train their leaders on how to do outreach to their population. But also by that time, when TEEM really started flourishing, I had started my doctoral program. And this is where the beautiful combination of educational best practices and leadership principles came into play. And I was able to work with faith-based institutions just as much as I was working with school districts, and helping them, one, to establish their leadership, because sometimes churches are kind of run like mom and pop shops. Then to also to sort of build their educational component, because the Bible says, go ye therefore and teach all nations. So if you have a strong educational component, you can reach more people. And then also helping them to understand their leadership styles, because many leaders in ministry, they're placed, they're given a role, but they don't understand what it means to be a leader in a very natural sense. And there are different types of leadership styles, and to know what that is and understand it. And then finally, with those faith-based institutions, helping them to establish their fivefold ministry, so that all the parts are fitly joined together, working together in harmony and in unison. And that as a pastor, you don't have to do it all.
All right.
The lead shepherd, right? Okay. Just because you're a pastor doesn't mean that you're apostolic.
All right.
Just because you're a pastor doesn't mean that you're prophetic. That's a title, really.
That's right.
Just because you're a pastor doesn't mean that you're an evangelist. Somebody got to bring them in. Somebody got to bring in the fish. The teacher's got to clean them in, right? Clean them, serve them up. So that's how TEEM evolved over time. And it's always been a for-profit. But over time, I also added the TEEM Leadership Institute to do better pricing, one, for nonprofits, because the for-profit side is, school districts, universities. I do trainings for universities and corporate and all that good stuff. But the nonprofit side really helps to support faith-based institutions as well as troubled youth. And so that's how it came to be. So there's a for-profit and a nonprofit side.
Awesome. And definitely we have to have you back to share more in depth about your organization, the nonprofit as well. But what I was just thinking as you were, I can see that you're very passionate about it. You were speaking my language, and I want to get excited about that. And so, but can you tell us, I'm always interested in knowing, is there one success story, whether it's one of your troubled youth or an organization or a nonprofit that, have used the work and now you're like, oh my God, look at that young person. Is there one that just kind of pops in your mind that you just now are like, this is God, that motivates you to keep pushing? Tell us real briefly, because I have another question and I want our audience to be able to ask questions. Please put in the if you have a question for Dr. Martin, we're going to take a look at that shortly.
Sure. Yes, there is one young lady in particular who had experienced severe molestation, sexual assault against her when she was younger. And I worked with her, as a youth, and now she's a young adult. And really to see her transformation to come out of the anger to it, and it was a hard process to unfold out of the anger, to then have a vision and mission for her own life. She didn't think she would finish high school. She didn't think that she would become anything in life. She thought she might follow the pathway of some others, just kind of not really having a purpose. There were people that she knew that were, strippers or prostitutes. And she thought that was maybe her lot in her plot, because what happens is, as a woman, that's why there's a conversation that we need to have with women, is that when you are exposed to those types of things at a very young age, you feel it becomes your norm. And you feel like, well, this is my path. And what I found that once I exposed her to other options, and then can say, look at me, I didn't take that path. Now, in book 2, when I talk about, which is entitled The Sparrow, it does talk about this other phase of the journey where I now struggle with my soul and soul ties, because I have to deal with the church hurt. I have to deal with this toxic and diabolical mix of spirituality and sexualism. I have to deal with the manipulation of people in power or in charge in the church, or, who's now, taking that spiritual piece and polluting it. And, it's very diabolical. But anyway, this young lady, to see her go to college, to see her want to have a family, because a lot of women who experience these things, they struggle with having a family because they don't want the cycle to repeat itself. They struggle with, whether or not they too want to continue to live. They don't see a future. I never thought I'd live past 25. I don't know why. That was just a number. I was like, well, I'll probably be dead by the time I'm 25. So what's the point? I might as well, live it up. And then some of the women become the predator in a very different way.
Yeah.
So there is a young lady, to see her now just thriving. She has a great job. She's living her life. She's a beautiful young woman, but it took exposure to other options.
Let me mention to our audience that your book, Incarcerated, Escaping the Prison of Your Mind, can be found at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and where books are sold. So please, I want to encourage you. This book is written so that, why don't you share? It is written so that what age population do you encourage to even begin to, even having a small group,
Sure.
book club, It would be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. I know many are developing book clubs with this to talk and dissect because it's intense, it's heavy, but young people are reading it in high school. I do know that. It will be up to the parent if you think that your middle schooler can, it's appropriate for them. For some it is, for some, it may not be. I don't know. But the thing is, there's so many kids who are experiencing stuff younger and younger. And, these kids are reading and getting into all kinds of stuff as early as 10, 12, so for some, it's up to the parent. But many of the kids, there are kids in high school who are reading it. There are adults who are doing book clubs. There are, again, those who are sending in their stories of, their personal healing process through reading the book. It really took them to a place to do the gut-wrenching work of acknowledging these things that happened to them, pouring their heart and soul out about it, seeking counseling. Because what happens is you just become a broken individual, and no matter how much you try, as much as I climbed the ladder in my professional life, I got to a certain point. I'm like, oh, I'm here. I'm arrived. I'm making money. But I was still broken. I still needed to be healed. I still needed some wholeness. Yes. And so, so I would say definitely high school age. Definitely.
Didn't mean to cut you off, Dr. Martin.
No, you're fine.
Okay. Because I want to ask for someone that may be listening tonight and may have a loved one that don't know the Lord. And is this book, so Christian based that what would you tell someone that wants that don't know the Lord? Would this be a help? And what kind of steps did you take to get you to a place for the change to take place in your life?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, it isn't
practical
written,
steps.
Sure. It really isn't written so Christian based.
Okay.
And it's intentionally not written that way. And I must say that I'm so grateful to Trilogy Publishing and the Trinity Broadcast Network,
yes,
TBN,
I'm glad
that have, that are marketing the book, that are publishing the book, that are widely distributing the book. Because when I first gave them my initial draft of my chapters, we had a conversation. And one, I tailored it so that it wouldn't be so triggering to the point that you can't recover. It reminds me of the movie Precious, where I don't know if you've seen that movie.
Yes,
that movie
years ago.
It took me to such a place, and I remember sobbing in the theater and feeling hopeless. I know that wasn't the intent, but there was such a spiral there, and I remembered that when I was writing this book, that there are definitely some events there that will take you on a journey, but you see the glimpses of light. And it's intentionally, and I'm glad they accepted it that way, that it's intentionally not written as a Christian-based book. It's written in a novel format of a story. And there is a very spiritual journey on it. And It's my journey. And so you'll have to determine your journey through the writing. And it is for anyone of any age. You will pick it up and you will find yourself in it. I can guarantee you for sure. If you've ever experienced trauma, if you have ever been mad at God, if you have ever felt hopeless, if you have ever felt trapped, like literally trapped by your past and past experiences, if you have felt that you were born at a disadvantage, this book will take you on a journey, and we go on that journey together. And there is a spiritual component. And again, it's my journey, and you'll have to decide what role you take on that journey.
Absolutely wonderful. I tell you, our audience are enjoying this conversation.